Welcome to the first video on PivotTables. In this video, we're going to dive into understanding PivotTables using a simple example and going through ribbon options and then wrapping it up to see why PivotTables are awesome. Okay, so let's set up the example here. And I've started off with some simple information about a company called Cruder Development. And let's say that this company is split into 5 different departments. We have accounting and finance, development management, IT, legal, and then sales and marketing. So I've represented each of these departments here with stick figures with the corresponding colors. And then let's pretend that we are in accounting and finance, this green guy here, and then we can charge any of these 4 accounts: cost of goods sold, inventory, payroll, sales, SG&A, and other expenses. And then furthermore, we can specify which projects we're working on, our Miami project, or if it's just like a general overhead cost, which is probably what most finance and accounting people would be. So you think that accounting and finance mainly be payroll expense and then most likely overhead, because you don't typically see an accountant or a finance person on the job working at a project. You typically see them as an overhead person calculating how much the projects are costing us. So let's take this example here, this data for our Cruder Development company, and then list out some fake transactions that then we can use a pivot table on. So I've done that already. And so here we have our simple sample data. And you can see that we have 2 transactions per every department. So we have finance and accounting here, and then it goes to development, IT, legal, and then lastly, sales and marketing. And each department is charging 2 separate accounts. They're charging sales here, and they're also charging their payroll expense. Now, this is awesome that we have all this data here, and it's not too hard to analyze just on this page because, what do we have here? We have only 10 transactions that have happened. So we can easily see on one page what is going on. But that doesn't really help us when we get more than 10. Let's say we have 100 transactions. Now it gets a bit more difficult. So typically somebody will say, hey, can you give me a high-level summary, or can you analyze this for me? And then so whenever you hear those words, just think that a pivot table would be perfect for it. So if you have a table and somebody says summarize or high level or analyze it in a certain way, first think, hey, I could probably create a pivot table. So what we're going to do is we're going to do exactly that and just create a pivot table and just start hashing through it and see what happens here. So I'm going to select anywhere on this table. I've set it up as an Excel table already. And therefore, if I go into the Insert tab on the ribbon and go to Pivot Table, Excel will already pick up this table that I'm in, and it's called Table 1. So we could be more specific and name our table, but I didn't in this case, and so it's called Table 1. So Excel is saying, hey, choose your data that you want to analyze. Well, it's picking up that I'm in this range already, and that's what we want to analyze. The next thing Excel always asks is, well, where do you want me to put this pivot table? Do you want it in a new worksheet, which means a new tab that they'll generate for me? Or do you just want to put it somewhere next to this data or wherever you want? Go ahead and then specify that location. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to click on this and say I want to put it smack dab right next to this table. Pop it back out. And then you can also add this to a data model. That's a little bit more advanced. So we're just going to stick with this and hit OK. Okay, so I just formatted the sheet a little bit better so we can see everything. Now, immediately you should notice that you have 2 things that just happened. You have a pivot table little box here that it created. And then over on the right, it gave you this task pane for pivot table fields. I'm going to pull this off of here so that's a little bit closer so we can analyze this a bit nicer. And first of all, let's go over this task pane. So let's just focus on this box here. Notice that this top piece is called our pivot table fields. And we have 5 fields. We have our company, which is the same thing over here on a table. Same thing with department. Department is next. Then accounts, projects, and amount. So all of those headers on your table are now here as field labels that you can drag and drop into one of the 4 quadrants. So by mastering how pivot tables work, just realize that there are no formulas needed whatsoever in a pivot table. It's all drag and drop. It's clicking of the mouse. It's selecting different options of how you want to display your pivot table, how you want to analyze it, how you want to design it, how you want it laid out, where you want the totals to be, and all this other customization. But what I want to stress is that there's no formulas. It's all about understanding what will happen when I grab one of these fields, click and drag it, and throw it into one of the quadrants. So if I put it here into my rows, what will happen? If you can get to the point where you'll already know what will happen prior to putting it there, that's when you know you have mastered pivot tables. And that's where you're going to be at the end of this video series. So let's start with this first thing that I just did. I threw company into the rows quadrant, and notice that Cruder development is the only thing that is showing right now in the pivot table. What if I say, now drag my amount into my values? Notice that the amount is 65,440. That's exactly what the total of this chart is, 65,440. Now, why is that? Well, that's because this column, company column, is Cruder development. Therefore, nothing was filtered out. It was all summed up to 65,440. So now you might be questioning, why did Excel just show Cruder development and not list it 10 times over again like it did in my chart? And then how did it know to sum it instead of count it or average the number or show me the min or max? That's because Excel sees that there are values in all of these fields, and therefore by default says this person probably wants it to be summed. So you can come down here to the values in this quadrant here, and you can see that it says sum of amount. You can left click on here and say, hey, I want to go to my value field settings, and then this dialog window will pop up. You can say summarize my values by sum, count, average, all these different options. And then typically you want it to be summed. So that's why Excel defaulted to summing this number. And just remember that we're making a summary. So everything in this table should get condensed somehow to be shown in a pivot table for a higher level view of the data that will be summarized. Let's go ahead and do something else. Let's pull out the company and then throw in departments in that same spot. Notice that it still is adding up that same amount. So 65,440 and 54 cents. But note that we get subtotals. We get like a subtotal saying, hey, accounting and finance, they're spending $6,968. Well, how did it know that? Well, it's just taking these two rows and adding it, summarizing it, getting a higher level view of what that is. So the sum of these two comes to 6,900, basically $7,000. So let's go ahead and filter this table here for just that department. So I'm going to select only accounting and finance and quickly notice that, hey, 69,680, that's exactly what this table is showing me when I filter it. So let's pop back out of here. And so in our next video, we're going to continue to expand upon this same pivot table and table example by seeing what happens when we start moving these fields around in the 4 quadrants, and also take a peek at what we now have available in the pivot table tools section for the Analyze and Design tabs on the ribbon.